Hey everyone, it's Latency here and welcome to the attic. And today we're going to talk about a little bit of a boring topic, and that's MIDI. Now, because I know this is a rather boring topic, let me just put up a little bit of Minecraft and some cookie clicker here so you have something to watch while we'll talk about this. Now, all jokes aside, I think MIDI is a overlooked thing and most people kind of dislike it, and so do I. So I tried to find a solution that made life just a little bit easier, and that's what I want to talk about today. So up until this day, my MIDI interface was actually this Motu Micro Express. It's a very nice little MIDI interface. It's also probably about as old as I am, and even though it functions quite well, the software and routing is a bit outdated. So I was looking for something new, and one of the options I found was the Conductive Labs MRRC router. But the downside of this router is that A, it's rather big. It's about 3 HE if you count in the space for the cables. It's also pretty expensive. So I was looking at something a little more compact and just about as feature rich, and that's why I landed on this, the mioXL by iConnectivity. Now this unit is only 1 HE, which is quite convenient and still has a lot of inputs and outputs and quite a bit of control on the front panel. It's not quite as hands-on as the MRRC, but still offers a few of the functions that I really wanted to play with. Now, the thing with MIDI interfaces is, like I kind of tried to demo in the intro, is they don't make sound, which makes it inherently boring to talk about, because there's no shininess or sounds or noises, but I still want to kind of demonstrate the sort of thing why I wanted to upgrade my MIDI solution. So let's just quickly talk about having multiple hardware units in your studio. So right here I have my JDXA, I have my D50, back here I have my System 1, and down here I have a JV1080 and a JV880. Now, how useful hardware is another discussion, but if you happen to have multiple hardware units, it can be very convenient to have some way to control them remotely, be it through a DAW or through a controller, like this KeyStep by Arturia. And the neat thing here is that I've set it up in a way where I can actually control multiple synths from one unit. So this, for instance, is my my JDXA. And here I have the System 1. This is the D50. And the last track is the JV1080. And the convenience of having everything in one place is actually quite nice, because it requires less routing in the DAW to get things done. You can just simply press a button and play whatever synth from your controller. Of course, you can also switch this around, and that's the nice thing of the mioXL. You actually have several profiles and presets, and you can quite easily change that routing to have your JDXA control your JV1080 or your D50 or whatever in your studio. I think that's pretty neat, and it makes things just a little bit easier and a little less finicky in the DAW. So let's take a look at the software and the routing and the way I have this set up, just to give you a little bit of inspiration of what you can do with MIDI and an interface like the mioXL. Okay, now before we make a new routing to show you how that works, it's kind of handy to reiterate the setup here. Just have a little bit of an idea of what's going on. So what you see here is my Studio 1824 mixer. We're not using a DAW right now, we're using the built-in mixer of my audio interface. And this mixer has 4 stereo pairs going on. So we have the JDXA on what is labeled mic track 5. We have the D50, track 3. System 1 on track 7, and then we have the JV1080 on track 1. Now the setup I had going on in my little intro demo is with the key step, which is right beside me. So track 1 is JV. Track 2 on the key step is the System 1, D50, and track 4 is the JV 1080. So let's actually go to a new patch. So let's go to a new patch on the mioXL. As you can see in the new patch, nothing is routed except for the outputs to the DAW, which are pre-routed, which is quite convenient. So now let's say I want to be able to play the JDXA on my D50. So I will say the input is the D50, the output is the JDXA. Now the problem is, because both tracks are on in the mixer, you will hear it both at the same time. Of course, in the DAW you would only arm the track that you're listening to, so let's disable the D50. It's really that easy to route things around. Let's say I wanted to play with the System 1 for a little bit. I can just select the System 1, which is in the USB part. And the same goes for the JV. And obviously you're not limited to just one, you can also route to several synths at the same time. So let's include the System 1 as well. And it's that simple to route synths to different places. Now let's quickly look at the DAW as well while we're on it. So let's just open up the DAW for a second. So with a fresh little page of Reaper, we can now route the D50 MIDI, which is connected or assigned to DIN 8, to the DAW, simply by selecting MIDI DIN 8, and if you play something in, you can see the MIDI shows up. And if we want to output route it, for instance, to, let's do the JDXA, which is DIN 7. We can simply say hardware output, DIN 7. So that's quite easy to set up. You can also MIDI merge things, so you can, for instance, route several synths to the same USB. So let's put this one to DIN 8 as well. Now if we record, all the MIDI gets nicely merged into the same track. So that's very convenient. Let's say we like this specific routing and we want to save it. We can just go to presets, save preset as. Let's make this preset 1 and we can give it any name. So let's go for D50 to JDXA. And we can save it. The preset is saved and the screen will show the correct name. And this is also kind of how I intend to use the unit, with specific routings for every synth setup. Now, in this setup, obviously my key step doesn't do anything anymore because that routing is no longer available. So this could potentially be an issue in some scenarios. And the nice thing here is you can actually change your MIDI route or your presets on the mioXL with control messages. So the way we set this up is actually quite simple. We output to control. Now I wanted to demonstrate this with a controller, but my nano control doesn't do PC messages. So unfortunately that's not going to work. So we route the MIDI out of the DAW to control. We set it to program changes. We are going to draw in a program change and set this value to 0. Let's go to bar 4. Let's add a program change. Let's set this one to 1. Click OK. So if we press play now, we will first switch to our first preset on the mioXL, which is the key step preset. So I can play the different parts of my key step, and then once we reach bar 4, it will, the end of bar 4, we reach bar 5 I guess, we're switching to that second preset where we have the JDXA on the D50. So let's press play. We have nothing here, but we can play on the key step, and then, but we have nothing on the key step. So you can switch through the different presets with control messages, program control messages. So that's definitely something I want to integrate into this setup as well. Having the ability to be at one keyboard with a controller, just pressing buttons to switch between different routings is a very nice feature to have. And one thing to keep in mind is that notes do get stuck when the change happens. Personally, I would have loved to see a note off going out on all channels, on all outputs once a preset change occurs. I have no idea why this isn't the case. Just as a demonstration, I'm going to start it off at beat 5, so it switches to the D50. And then we will see that if I hold notes over the preset change, the keys will get stuck. So that's something to keep in mind. It would have been nice if there was a global option for preset swapping, sending out a kill for all node-ons, so just node-offs all over all channels, all over all outputs to prevent this kind of behavior. For now, if you're preset swapping, just make sure there are no notes playing and you should be absolutely fine. Now the way the KeyStep Pro setup is it has 4 tracks and every track outputs a single MIDI channel. So track 1 is MIDI channel 1, track 2 is MIDI channel 2, track 3 is MIDI channel 3, and track 4 is MIDI channel 4. Very good. So right now we're set to track 1. So if I play anything, the KeyStep will output MIDI channel 1, and all these synths are listening to MIDI channel 1. So obviously when I play something, they will all respond. So we need to do some filtering here. So with everything connected to the key step, if we play it out, we get everything. So this is where we filter it out a little bit. We go to the outputs, because it's the output to the synth that we want to filter. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but it will eventually make sense. So let's make sure I can actually play this. And let's filter out everything to the JV. Let's filter everything out to the 50 and everything to the... And now, even though all the synths are still connected, the notes are only sent to the JDXA. Now this isn't exactly ideal, because now we can only play one synth, so we need to build this up a little bit. So let's do track 2 JV1080. So we're going to allow channel 2 to send to the JV1080. Doesn't change anything here. If I set the key step to track 2, you will hear nothing, because the JV1080 is not listening to MIDI channel 2, it's listening to MIDI channel 1. So for this we need to remap. For remapping, you can simply click remap, and we are going to remap everything on channel 2 to channel 1. Go. So now if we have track 2 selected on the key step, we're sending MIDI channel 2, which is accepted by the JV1080, and remapped by the Mio to channel 1, so the JV1080 will play. And we can simply repeat this process for the other synths. So we can, for instance, say we want the D50 on track 3. And we are just going to remap. Let's first demonstrate track 3. Nothing happens. And now we can just remap them to channel 1. It would have been nice if there was, like the filter, a remap everything button, but this what is. So track 3 is now the D50 and track 4 is nothing. So let's send the system 1 on track 4, so let's allow 4 to pass through. Nothing happens because the system 1 is listening to channel 1, so let's remap channel 4 to channel 1. And now if you play track 1, JV, track 2 is the track 1 JDXA, track 2 JV1080, track 3 D50, track 4 system 1. So that's how you remap and filter. This allows you to make very distinct presets where you can, like this, route one controller with several channels to several different synths and have them respond individually. Although there are some caveats, and for that I need to take out the JDXA because it's a little bit peculiar, and I will show you one of the issues with the mioXL, which is that you can't remap to several MIDI channels. You can only select one, and if you check another channel, it will unselect the first channel you've selected. And this is a little bit of an issue with the JDXA, so let's take a look at that. So to demonstrate why it can be an issue to not be able to map a single channel to several channels, I introduce you to the Roland JDXA, a somewhat forgotten and definitely neglected flagship synthesizer by Roland. And the fun thing here is that you have 4 analog parts, and then there's also digital parts. Now the analog parts are represented here, and if you play a MIDI channel into it, it will send channel 1 to analog voice 1, channel 2 to analog voice 2, etc. So the 4 tracks and 4 channels on the key step correspond to a single analog part. Now obviously those all are mono. And that also means you can sequence them independently from each other, which is kind of cool. The only downside is that the instrument does sound quite different when you're playing a single voice versus playing all voices. So if we just play the instrument on the JDXA itself, it sounds more like this. Now if you kick it into the polystack mode, where it just duplicates one voice or one part to allow for 4 voices, that's less of an issue because everything is on MIDI channel 1, so that works just fine. But obviously a 4 voice polyphony as a max. So that sounds the same. And one trick Roland does is it has some digital parts to fill in for the lack of polyphony. So with the digital voices on, it sounds quite different between just sending channel 1 and sending all channels. Because we have these digital voices playing when we run out of the 4 voice polyphony of the analog part. So this is one instance where being able to send more than one channel is actually important for the way the instrument sounds. And I think there are more instruments, including more Roland instruments, where they build up the sounds out of parts and a single MIDI channel will only target a single part. Now you could potentially fix this with doing some software stuff and working around it, but I think it would be more beneficial if it was just in the mioXL to be able to say, don't send this to just MIDI 1, send this to several MIDI channels, or remap this to several MIDI channels. So yeah, that's that part demonstrated. Okay, so that's one of the downsides. Remapping is limited to just one channel, which can in certain situations be a bit of an issue. Keep that in mind. If that's something you really need, you are going to need a different solution, or you have to add a solution to solve that problem for you. Another thing we should quickly touch upon is USB devices with the mioXL. So you can attach any USB device to the mioXL. Now, before you can actually use the USB device, you need to make a USB host reservation, which is as simple as selecting your USB device so it can have a fixed space on the mioXL. Interesting thing here is you can actually disconnect, for instance, the key steps. Let's turn it off. Let's physically take the cable and connect it to another port. And now if I turn it back on, it will remember that it is on host 2. So that's why you need to make reservations. So wherever you plug this in, it will always show up at the same place, so your routing will stay intact. Bus power. So the neat thing is you can actually just connect controllers and use the bus power to feed the devices. So that's very neat. One downside, however, is that the USB does not through pass to software on your PC. So if, like, for instance, you have this key step, it has its own set of software, but it will not detect the key step as long as it is connected to the mioXL. So if, for instance, you need to do software updates, you will have to disconnect from the mioXL and you have to connect straight to the PC. Now if we do this, we should in theory need to restart probably. There we go. It will detect and you can do your firmware updates and all that sort of stuff. So if you are using a USB MIDI controller or USB synth or anything that does updates over the USB, make sure you also have a direct to PC MIDI connection available, because you need it to update your software. Once again, connected to the mioXL. If I turn my key step on and I open the software, it will not detect the key step. So that's one minor limitation you have with this system. I don't think that's the worst, but it is important to keep in mind. While on the topic of limitations and things that could be changed, maybe perhaps, which are all just nice to haves and personal preference, I think, but it's also all software, so it's all fixable. One of the things that I would really love to see on this is a nice little matrix, so you can quite easily see all your routings in one matrix instead of having to click backwards and forwards through the control panels. It is definitely not something that is an absolute must, but it would be a nice to have for sure. Custom remapping is a bit of a tall ask, but there are software applications that allow you to very specifically change specific MIDI messages into other specific MIDI messages. One thing that comes to mind is mioX. In mioX you can actually remap, and in the mioX remap you can very specifically say channel 1, for instance, I want a program change and I want to map that to channel 3, I don't know, a node off event or stuff like that. This is very deep and definitely very niche, so I can see that they haven't implemented this, but it might be a nice to have in a device like this. As mentioned in the preset part of this video, another thing that I think would be nice to have is a global toggle for node off to the active MIDI channels when you're switching presets. That would be very nice to have, especially in a live situation, because the neat thing is the mioXL works without the computer hardware, so you can turn the computer down. The routing will still work. So having the option to use this in a live setting where it will kill all the nodes of the previous preset would be a big benefit, I think. Now the mioXL has some nice activity stuff on the display, but there's no activity log in the software. This is also something I think could be very useful. For instance, one of the issues I was having is that the System 1 can output program changes, and it does so quite successfully. I can see them in the mioX application just fine. But for some reason it won't change the settings on the mioXL like the DAW did. Now I'm going to assume that's some sort of routing issue. Problem being that I can't actually check on the mioXL if the messages are being received and if the messages are being received in the correct fashion. So having some way to see activity in the software would be a nice to have, I think. This is also handy when troubleshooting connections. If you have this in a rack somewhere, you might not always be as easy to access the display to see what is going on. Also, the display, although nice, isn't granular enough in details to properly troubleshoot things. It's just an indication of whether or not a connection is being accessed, and that's the granularity of the detail you have on the display. So very nice to have, but in troubleshooting situations, something like a log would be more useful. While on the topic of nice to haves that are pretty niche and probably never going to happen, it would be cool if the unit had some sort of learning functionality. And this could be as easy as a button where you can press learn either on the device or in the software, and you can just press your host MIDI and press your destination MIDI and it would map for you. So for instance, I would say I want to map the D50 to the JDXA. I would just press a button, press a key here, press a key here, and that routing is set up for you. I think this is doable, but again, it's kind of niche. Although I can see it being very useful in bigger setups where things get a little bit more complicated than this rather simple setup, of course. Now, on the topic of latency and stuff like that, I haven't noticed any measurable or experienceable latency with these things. It's also no hanging notes or anything. So that's absolutely excellent, and it's also something I would experience for a high quality device like this. So it definitely feels like the sort of thing that you could take on the road, and you don't have to worry about whether or not the MIDI routing is going to be stable, because it feels rock solid and it feels very fast. Now, one topic I haven't covered yet and that I won't be covering in this video is the network functionality of the mioXL. And that's simply because I don't have a setup to properly use it. But conceptually, it allows you to send MIDI over the network from one device to another device, which is very powerful if you have, for instance, several studio rooms or a control room and a actual studio, something like that. It does allow for a lot of extra functionality. It also allows you to bridge greater distances because MIDI does have the tendency to stop working after a very limited distance. So if you have a bigger room with more devices, having that MIDI over network functionality is definitely a nice to have. But it's not something I can test within this space and with the gear I have. So I think that about covers everything I have to say about the mioXL. So far the experience has been great. I still have some experimenting to do with the program changing and getting that integrated into this setup. But even with the key step as a controller, the overall experience has been very good, very responsive and extremely stable, which are all things you like to see in a device like this. Connecting it up and using the device with the software is very simple, even though there are some niche use cases like the JDXA, unfortunately, where you run into some limitations of the device/software, because that's mostly a software thing anyways. I would highly recommend looking into something like this or the MRCC, depending on your needs. This, of course, is very much a MIDI routing tool. There are also tools that allow you to do arpeggiation or sequencing on the device. That's not what this tool is for. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was useful. If there are any questions, leave them down below. I will see you in the next one.